Hi everyone, welcome to today's video. Today I'm going to be going through some thrillers that I think are really great if you're just wanting to get into the genre. So I have got some that I think are genre specific, so it's more like if you typically read this genre, try this thriller. And then others are just general thrillers that I think anyone could pick up and really enjoy. I feel like these ones are really gripping and they're just what you want when you want to start getting into thrillers. So to start off with, I'm going to go for, if you typically read literary fiction, I think a real good place to start is Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn, which I feel like is the classic thriller recommendation. So many people recommend this book. And I feel like some people may think it's not really a beginner thriller because the writing is probably not what you would expect from a thriller, but that's why I feel like it's a really good way of bridging the gap between literary and thrillers. This one is about this couple called Nick and Amy, and Amy has gone missing, we find out in this, and we have chapters following present day while Nick is alongside the police trying to find Amy and figure out what happened. And then we have other chapters of Amy's diary from when she first met Nick up until the time that she disappears. While it is fast paced, I feel like it's still written in a literary fiction way, if that makes sense. So I really do highly recommend this one if you are looking to kind of bridge that gap. I think that Gillian Flynn in general is a great author to try, but I feel like Gone Girl specifically is the classic go-to. If you've not watched a film or heard about the spoiler in this, I think it's a really great one because I feel like it will really shock you, especially if you are just getting started in the thriller genre. Next up, I've got a couple of recommendations for if you enjoy romance. So the first one I have got here is When No One Is Watching by Alyssa Cole. Alyssa Cole writes romance books as well. She's typically known for historical romance, but this was her first delve into thrillers and I really enjoyed this one. This one does have a romance within it, which is why I feel like it's a really great one to again kind of gradually work your way to the more intense thrillers. This thriller is essentially themed around gentrification. We're following our main character Sydney, and she lives in Brooklyn, and she feels like everyone around her, all of her neighbours, are just disappearing and selling their houses, and rich white people are essentially moving in. But it kind of hints at the fact that perhaps these neighbours haven't been selling, they've disappeared in other ways, by other means. So Sydney is essentially full of paranoia and it really makes you uneasy as a reader because there is that romance element as she meets Theo, who helps her figure out what's going on. There is that familiarity with the romance genre, which I feel like is a really good stepping stone into the more intense, dark thrillers. The other thriller that I think would be great for romance readers, and I know that this author isn't like loved by everyone, but I do think that Verity by Colleen Hoover would be a really good place to start. A lot of people that enjoy Colleen Hoover and enjoy romance have read Verity anyway, and I feel like if that is you and you loved Verity, you could jump straight in with certain thrillers because Verity to me is a thriller. To me, it's not a romance. Yes, there are romantic elements to it. I didn't really like the romance in it, but it's there. I really enjoyed the thriller aspect to Verity. So in Verity, we are following this woman called Lowen, and she's an author, and she is asked to write this author Verity's books because Verity is paralysed. Something happens, Verity becomes paralysed and can't finish her book series, so she gets Lowen in to come and write it for her, and she is employed by Verity's husband. And to kind of get a grasp of Verity's writing style and her notes and all things like that, Lowen moves into the home and is going through all of Verity's belongings in her office, reading through transcripts and all that, and she comes across this transcript that seems to be very based in reality. And we read this transcript alongside Lowen, and it is extremely intense. It is absolutely wild in my opinion. I really enjoyed this one, and like I said, if you have already read it and enjoyed it, start reading some thrillers because you will love them. And if you haven't, then I do recommend giving it a go, because Colleen Hoover's writing is very digestible, it's very easy to read, and if you are already used to her writing style or her romances, then it's a real good way of kind of testing the water, seeing if you enjoy the content in these books, and if you do, then I would say you could move on to some other thrillers. And then I have got a recommendation for if you're kind of into like dystopian sci-fi, more dystopian than sci-fi to be honest, but it is The Passengers by John Marrs. This follows a world where driverless cars are the norm, and this hacker gets into these 8 people's cars specifically, and they are specifically chosen. And what happens is they are all going to meet at the same spot at the same time and crash into each other. And we have this jury alongside the general public deciding which one of them will be saved. One of them will be saved and the others will all crash into each other and die. We have this live stream going on where we find out all of the secrets of these specific people chosen, and as we learn more about each one, we see the votes of who should be saved change, and it's just so intense. Like, you really don't know the way this is going to play out. Some of the secrets that these people have are really shocking, but it also kind of, you put yourself in the minds of the general public voting, and you're kind of like, who deserves to be saved out of these people? And yeah, it is very, very intense. I won't say any more because I feel like I could get into spoiler territory very quickly, but I do think if you're into dystopian literature, this is a real good place to start if you're wanting to get into thrillers. Okay, some other thrillers now that I just think are generally great thrillers to start with. They're all very gripping, and the twists and turns in them will keep you wanting more. So we have got You by Caroline Kepnes. This is what the TV show You is based on. And the thing I like the most about this is it's written in second person, and it really puts you in the story. And in my opinion, it makes the pacing of this so fast because you're just anticipating what's going to happen, and because you're so involved, you really want to know how it's going to end. We are essentially following this guy called Joe Goldberg, who is a stalker, and he is stalking this girl called Beck. But Beck doesn't realise that she's being stalked by him. She ends up in a relationship with him, and it is just so, so intense. The twists and turns that this book takes are wild, but I really, really enjoyed it. I also loved the TV show. I haven't read any more of the books other than this one, so I don't know how closely they align. I do think that the book and the show are quite similar, so it could be quite a good one to read if you have watched the show. You kind of know what to expect going in, and it doesn't then seem so daunting to you when you are trying to start out a whole new genre. But yeah, this one I would highly, highly recommend. Next up, we have got 13 by Steve Kavanagh. This is in a series, it's number 4 in a series, but it is one that you can read out of order. I read this first before I read any others. I have read one other, and I think that was the second book in the series, so I haven't even read the first one yet. But it's the Eddie Flynn series. Eddie Flynn is a lawyer, so it's all these cases that he is taking on, essentially. This one, as you can see here, it says that the serial killer isn't on trial, he's on the jury. It is so, so good and so unexpected. I absolutely loved this one. We follow chapters from the killer, but obviously we don't know who he is, so it's all very anonymous to begin with, and we are following like what he's getting up to, how he's going about these crimes, how he managed to kind of trick his way onto the jury, and how he's managing to get away with it. It is so, so good. When you find out who it is like, pardon? I had to read it a couple of times because I couldn't believe what I was reading, but it's so, so good. And I just think that this whole premise is really unique and a real fun place to start. I think if you do end up really enjoying this one, then the courtroom drama thrillers would be right up your street, along with like the police procedurals. I love them. I know they're not for everyone, but I do think that this is a real fun place to start and kind of get an idea as to what kind of thrillers you might enjoy. Then I have basically listed any book by Tiffany D. Jackson. I adore Tiffany D. Jackson, and she writes YA, but her books are so dark that I feel like as an adult you can read them and still be massively creeped out by what's going on. The book that I've picked up to specifically recommend is Allegedly. This one is following this girl called Mary who has allegedly killed a baby, and she is in this group home and she ends up getting pregnant herself. And this has kind of motivated her to try and get out of the situation she's in, because she was 9 years old when this baby died. This white baby died in the care of Mary's mother, and Mary was present. So it takes so many twists and turns. It is very dark considering it is YA, but because it's YA, the writing is a bit more accessible, I would say. I feel like thrillers in general they're quite easy to read, but the topics in them can be extremely dark. While these are dark, I feel like they are told in a way that isn't too much. I think they are just absolutely perfect. I also love Grown by Tiffany D. I love all of Tiffany D. Jackson's. My favourite is Monday's Not Coming, but I feel like that's not really a thriller. This one definitely is, and I'd say Grown is kind of on the verge of being a thriller as well. But yeah, this one I would definitely say is a thriller, and it's one that I highly recommend. Okay, a few more now that I don't have physical copies of. So I would recommend Final Girls by Riley Sager. This is Riley Sager's first book, and in my opinion actually it is my favourite. I think it's definitely in my top 2 of Riley Sager's books. I feel like my opinions of Riley Sager's books are kind of unpopular. The books that everyone seems to love I didn't like, and the books that everyone hates I quite liked. So Final Girls is my favourite book by him. So we're following this girl called Quincy, and she is a final girl. However many years prior, she ended up involved in this massacre along with her friends, but she survived. And she ended up being grouped with these other girls that were nicknamed the Final Girls in the press. So all these years pass, these 3 women that have been grouped together, kind of carry on with their lives as normal. But what happens is one of them ends up dying. She's found dead. And the other one ends up coming to Quincy, and basically they become fearful that they're next, that someone is after them. And we are essentially trying to figure out what's going on here, but also what happened in the past. Who was the killer in Quincy's past? It's really good. It did shock me, to be honest. Some people say this is really predictable. I didn't think so. I was really surprised. And I do think that if you haven't read many thrillers or any, it's a real good place to start. I do think that once you have read a few, there are certain plot twists that become quite predictable. But I think when you're just getting started, it's so fun because you don't really know the tricks that the authors are using to kind of throw off the scent as to who it is. So I think that by going in completely new to the genre is a real fun way of discovering all these incredible books, but also the feeling when you read a book with an insane plot twist that you have never read before it's such a good feeling. So I'm actually quite jealous of anyone who is just starting out into the thriller genre. Next I have chosen Then She Was Gone by Lisa Jewell. Lisa Jewell is kind of like a staple author in the thriller genre. This one is one of my favourites by her, and we are following this woman whose daughter Ellie disappeared, and she ends up seeing this really young child who looks exactly like Ellie, and we are trying to figure out what on earth is going on and what happened to Ellie back in the day, who this girl is, because how has this girl come into this woman's life, and kind of following this woman try and somewhat move on from what happened and what happened to her daughter. This one's so intense. I loved it. I thought it was so good. Highly recommend this one, and I do recommend Lisa Jewell in general. Her books are pretty easy to read. They're very fast paced, and I do think that's kind of what you need when you're trying out a new genre for the first time. So yeah, highly recommend quite a few of her books, but this one the most. The final book that I'm going to recommend is The Jigsaw Man, and this one is a serial killer thriller, which I love, but it's also like a detective novel too. We're following this detective, and these murders start happening, and it seems that there is a copycat killer, because these murders seem to be very similar to those of a serial killer known as the Jigsaw Man. And so our main character, the detective, is having to go into prison to speak to the Jigsaw Man to kind of try and figure out who could be doing this, the type of person that could be doing this, etc. But then the Jigsaw Man ends up escaping. So we then have two serial killers on the loose, essentially. It is very, very good. I really enjoyed this one. I think if you are interested in serial killer thrillers, detective fiction, then this is a real great one to try. So those are all the thrillers that I recommend to anyone who is thinking about getting into the genre. Let me know if I have managed to convince you to try any of these thrillers out if you don't typically read them, or if you do read thrillers, then pop in the comments down below a recommendation for someone who is just beginning to read them. That is it for today's video. I really hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, I would love it if you could like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!